Greetings, happy anniversary, 70 years. This is a moment to be incredibly proud of a strong history and indeed the foundations for a future where unions must stand and defend decent work, fundamental rights, equality in the interests of not just themselves but their children and their grandchildren. So we have a job to do, but first of all let me say to the leadership, to the delegates, this is a moment to celebrate indeed. We are shocked and the eyes of the world are on Korea, having made such progress in the 90s, early in this part of the decade, to see a government that is absolutely again attacking fundamental rights, incarcerating union leaders and members. This is not acceptable. The government of Korea, your president, you cannot accept that they are part of the international community of nations but refuse to follow fundamental international law. We stand with you, indeed with all the unions and members in Korea, in the fight for rights, for respect for rights. We've been looking at some of your companies and we know that when Samsung, that dominates your country's GDP, is so anti-union that it's not just affecting Korean workers, but it's affecting workers in their supply chains throughout the world, but in particular throughout Asia, so that workers are forced to live with poverty wages, with insecure and unsafe work. This has to stop. Unions are the bulwark against attacks on working people, against attacks on democracy, and we will fight for the rights of workers and indeed for the welfare and the prosperity of working families. Let me say to you that the world in itself is not an optimistic place for workers right this minute. It's indeed an environment where now we see with only 60% of the workforce in the formal sector, even more than half of those are battling with insecure work, with precarious work, short-term contracts, poverty wages, often unsafe work, and indeed most of our people don't have social protection, certainly not adequate social protection. We have to make sure that the global model of trade, which now has 80% of money made through the supply chain, 60% in production, that it is a model of trade where rights, where minimum living wages, where collective bargaining rights, where social protection is fundamental. And of course we want to see safe work. But let me also just reflect on the fact that 40% of our brothers and sisters are in the informal economy, the economy where there is no rights, no minimum wages, no social protection. These workers are indeed workers we stand with. We want to organise, we want to include in our union family, and we want to formalise their work. And tragically, around 30 million of our brothers and sisters are in slavery, in modern slavery, forced labour, with many, many more in forced conditions of overtime, often working 10, 12, 2, 4 a.m. in the morning, often without food. We know that the world has to change. We will fight to actually tame corporate power, to bring about fundamental rights in supply chains, to end corporate greed. But we will also stand with workers against governments who fail to stand up for their own citizens. And sadly, that's what we see in Korea. So once again, I say, it's unions who stand on the front line. It's working people who need their unions to be strong, to support their rights, their livelihoods, their security, and the future for their children and grandchildren. Together, we can create a better world, and your legacy, the future that you will build, will be part of that. Solidarity.